All right, lesson 2-8, graphing linear and absolute value inequalities. So by the time we are done with this lesson, we should be able to graph linear and absolute value inequalities. So this section is really going to be just a review of graphing linear and absolute value equations. And then we're going to add in shading and then whether our boundary line should be solid or dashed based on the inequality. But really our rules are the same. So if we have a linear inequality, or even if we have an absolute value inequality, the way we graph it is the exact same that we've always graphed it. Okay? So the only difference is that we are going to add in shading at the end. So if we see these symbols, our boundary line, so the line that we use to connect our points together, is going to be a dashed line. If the bar is underneath it, it's going to be a solid line. Now for the shading, if it's the greater than symbol, we shade above. So really what this is saying is we want to shade the bigger y values. And then for these, if it's the less than symbol when we shade, we're going to shade below our line. So we want to shade all of the smaller y values. So now we're just going to practice. So first thing we want to do is recognize if it's going to be linear or absolute value, and then follow those rules for graphing. And then we do the shading at the end. And I don't have nice graph paper, so I'm going to freehand mine, but it might be easier since we're just learning graphing still to do it on nice graph paper. Okay, but I am just going to freehand mine. All right, so looking at this one, because we don't have an absolute value symbol, this is linear. So we're going to follow our rules for graphing linear equations. So we want it in the form of y equals mx plus b. So before I do anything, I'm going to solve this inequality for y. So we're going to subtract x to the other side. And then we're going to divide everything by 2. So we're graphing y greater than negative 1/2 x plus 1. So I'm going to make my graph. So we're going to start at the intercept, so up 1, put our point. Our slope is down 1 over 2, there's my second point. And then now I just have to make sure that I pay attention to whether I'm going to have a solid or a dashed line. So there's no bar underneath, so when I connect my points together, I want a dashed line. And then because it's greater than, we're going to shade above. So we want the bigger y values. And then we're done. All right, so again, the next one, this is linear because we don't have an absolute value symbol again. So I'm going to solve this equation for y. So I'm going to start by subtracting the 3x. And then because we have a fraction this time, to get rid of it, that means I need to multiply everything by 2. So then that will just become y less than or equal to negative 6 plus 4. And my y is by itself, so now I can start graphing. Oop, I forgot my x. So again, if I make my graph to start with, okay, so starting up at the y-intercept of 4, so 1, 2, 3, 4, here's my point. My slope is negative 6 over 1, so I'm going to go down 6 to the right 1. This time we are connecting it in a solid line because that bar is there. And since we are dealing with the less than symbol when we shade, this time we want to shade below our line. So we need to shade the y values that are going to be smaller. So that's going to be on this side. All right, next one. We see our absolute value sign. So that means that this is an absolute value inequality. So when we graph it, it's going to make a V shape. And we want to start by finding or identifying that vertex. So the vertex is going to be 0, 3. So if we do our T chart, so 0, 3 is in the middle, I'm going to add 1 to my x, so positive 1, and I'm also going to subtract 1. And then we're substituting in to find our y value. So if we start with 1, absolute value of 1 is 1, times 2 is 2, plus 3 is 5. And then we're going to get the same y value for negative 1. Okay, so again, I'm going to make my graph here. So for our first point, we are going to go left 1 up 5, and then up 3, right 1 up 5, and again, it's absolute value, so V shape. I have a bar underneath, so we're going to have a solid line. And then it's less than, so we need all the smaller y values, so we're shading below our line, so that's going to be everything outside that V shape. All right, one more example. So our last one is the absolute value. So again, when we graph it, it's going to be a V shape. So let's start by identifying our vertex. So vertex is going to be negative 1, 0. So again, if we make our t-chart, we would have negative 1, 0 in the middle. If we add 1, we have 0. Subtract 1, we have negative 2. Now we're just substituting. So if we start with 0, 0 plus 1 is 1. Absolute value of 1 is 1. Times 3 is 3. And then this one will be the same. Alright, so making our graph. So to start with, we're going to go left 2 up 3. Left 1, and then up 1, 2, 3. And again, this is the V shape. There's not a bar underneath, so when we connect it, we're going to make a dotted line, so a dashed line. Now, if you forget that part and you accidentally draw a solid line, you can write an arrow and just put dashed, and I'll understand what you meant by that. And then we're dealing with greater than, so that means we want all of our bigger y values. So that means that we're shading inside of our V for this one. And that is going to conclude section 8.